Hi everyone, welcome to Travel Talk, the podcast where we chat about everything related to traveling. I'm Liba.
And I'm Shamir. We're really excited to talk about one of our favorite things in the world, traveling. Whether you've traveled a lot or are just thinking about your first trip, we hope you'll enjoy our stories and tips.
Yes, we love sharing our travel experiences and helping others have great trips too. So let's get started. Mike, can you tell us about one of your favorite travel experiences?
Sure, Liba. One of my favorite trips was to Japan last year. Japan is such an amazing place. It's full of contrasts, like how you can visit a peaceful, ancient temple in Kyoto one day and then be in the middle of the bustling, modern city of Tokyo the next. I loved the mix of old and new, and the food was incredible too.
That sounds amazing, Shamir. I've always wanted to visit Japan. For me, one of my favorite travel experiences was when I went backpacking in South America. I traveled by myself, which was a little scary at first, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. I spent a month in Peru, visiting places like Machu Picchu and the Amazon rainforest. It was so beautiful and different from anything I'd seen before.
Traveling alone must have been such an adventure, Liba. I think everyone should try solo travel at least once. It really helps you grow as a person. You get to make your own decisions, meet new people, and learn a lot about yourself. Did you have any special experiences with the local culture during your trip?
Yes, I did. One of the highlights of my trip was staying with a local family in the Sacred Valley near Cusco. They were so kind and welcoming, even though we didn't speak the same language very well. I got to help them with their daily activities, like cooking and farming, and it gave me a much deeper appreciation for their way of life. It was an experience I'll never forget.
That sounds so special, Liba. Staying with locals is a great way to really understand a place. I had a similar experience in Morocco. I stayed in a small village in the Atlas Mountains, and it was really interesting to see how people live in such a remote area. Plus, the food was incredible. I had tagine almost every day, and I loved it.
Tagine is delicious. I love how food can be such an important part of the travel experience. It's not just about seeing new places, but also about tasting new foods and learning about different cultures. What's one food that you tried while traveling that you'll never forget?
I think the most unforgettable food I tried was in Thailand. I had a dish called som tam, which is a spicy green papaya salad. I thought I could handle spicy food, but this was on another level. It was so spicy, but also so tasty, that I couldn't stop eating it, even though I was sweating.
That sounds intense. I love trying new foods when I travel too, but sometimes it can be a bit of a surprise. Speaking of surprises, let's talk about some of the challenges we've faced while traveling. It's not always easy, right? What's one of the biggest travel challenges you've had?
Oh, there have been a few. One that stands out is when I got food poisoning in Pakistan. I had some street food in Lahore that didn't agree with me at all. I ended up being sick for 2 days, stuck in my hotel room. It was tough, but it taught me to be more careful about what I eat, especially from street vendors.
That sounds awful, Mike. I've had food poisoning while traveling too, and it's really no fun. But like you said, it's a learning experience. One of my biggest challenges was when I missed my train in Thailand. I was supposed to take an overnight train to Chiang Mai, but I got the time wrong and missed it by just a few minutes. I didn't know what to do at first, but then I met some other travelers who were in the same situation, and we found a place to stay for the night. It turned out to be a great night because I made some new friends.
That's a great example of how sometimes travel mishaps can lead to unexpected good times. I think it's important to stay flexible and not let little problems ruin your trip. Traveling teaches you to go with the flow and make the best of every situation.
Absolutely. It's all part of the adventure. Now, for our listeners who might be planning their next trip, Let's share some practical tips. What's one travel tip you always follow?
One thing I always do is pack light. I used to bring too much stuff with me, and it was such a hassle to carry it all around. Now, I try to only bring what I really need. It makes moving around so much easier, especially if you're taking trains or buses or walking a lot. Also, I always bring a small first aid kit with me, just in case.
That's a great tip, Mike. I agree that packing light is the way to go. One thing I always do is make sure I have copies of important documents, like my passport, in case anything gets lost or stolen. I keep one copy in my luggage and another in my email so I can access it anywhere. It gives me peace of mind.
That's really smart, Liba. You never know what might happen, so it's good to be prepared. Another tip I have is to learn a few basic phrases in the local language before you go. Even just knowing how to say, hello, thank you, and please, can make a big difference in how people treat you.
That's so true. People really appreciate it when you make an effort to speak their language, even if it's just a few words. It shows respect for their culture. I always try to learn a bit of the language before I visit a new place. It's also a fun way to get to know the culture better.
Speaking of culture, let's talk about cultural differences. When you're traveling, you might find that things are done differently than you're used to. It can be surprising or even a little confusing at times. Have you ever had an experience like that?
Yes, definitely. One time in Japan, I was at a restaurant and didn't realize that tipping isn't done there. I left a tip on the table, and the waiter actually ran after me to return it. I felt a bit embarrassed, but I learned that in Japan, good service is expected and tipping can even be seen as rude.
That's a great example. Tipping customs are so different around the world. In some places, like the US, tipping is expected, while in others, it's not. It's important to do a little research before you go to a new country so you know what to expect.
Absolutely. Another cultural difference I noticed was in Pakistan. When I was there, I saw that people eat with their right hand, even if they're left-handed. It's part of the culture, and it's something you should be aware of if you're visiting. It took me a little while to get used to it, but it's all part of the experience.
That's a good point. There are so many little things like that which are different from what we're used to. But that's what makes traveling so interesting. You get to see how other people live and think, and it broadens your perspective.
I completely agree. Traveling has taught me to be more open-minded and understanding of different cultures. It's made me realize that even though people might do things differently, we're all really just people trying to live our lives in the best way we can.
Well said, Liba. Traveling really does bring people closer together. So, before we finish, let's do a quick round of questions to help our listeners get to know us a bit better. I'll ask you some quick questions, and you answer with the first thing that comes to mind. Ready?
Ready.
Okay, first question. What's your favorite place you've ever visited?
That's a tough one. But I'd have to say Peru, because of the amazing nature and the history there.
Great choice. Next question. What's one place you haven't been to yet but really want to visit?
I really want to go to New Zealand. I've heard the landscapes are incredible.
New Zealand is definitely on my list too. Alright, next, what's your favorite travel snack?
I love packing granola bars. They're easy to carry and give me energy when I'm on the go.
Good choice. What's the longest flight you've ever been on?
My longest flight was from New York to Tokyo, about 14 hours. It was a long one, but I watched a lot of movies.
Long flights can be tough, but they're worth it for the adventure that awaits. Last question, what's your number one travel tip for our listeners?
I'd say, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. Some of the best travel experiences happen when you try something new or go somewhere different.
That's great advice, Liba. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode of Travel Talk. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed our stories and tips, and that they inspire you to plan your next trip.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, like this episode, and share it with your friends.
We'll be back soon with more travel stories and advice. Until then, happy travels!